about 1 in 3 women have some sort of a hormonal health condition. I actually think it's been one of the most amazing things about social media is what it's done for women's healthcare.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Inner Growth Podcast. I am so grateful you are tuning in today, and I'm so excited because I'm here recording with Rachel, who is the founder of Allara Health. Hi, Rachel. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
I'm so excited. Today, we're going to be talking all about hormone health, PCOS, your journey, and how that has also impacted your own inner growth journey. But before we get into it, can you introduce yourself and share your big three in astrology?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm Rachel Blank. I'm the founder of Allara, which is a virtual care platform for women with chronic hormonal conditions like PCOS. Okay, so for astrology, I'm a Pisces sun. And then wait, did I say I'm a Sag
Moon.
a Sag moon and a Scorpio rising?
Yes. And we are waiting to start recording so I can give my astrologer input. Pisces is all about your spirituality. I find them to be very easygoing, go with the flow, also loves to rest, really enjoy just a slower pace at times, but can be really social. It's kind of that fluid energy.
Okay.
But when I saw that you were a Scorpio rising, I was like, that makes a lot of sense to me because each zodiac sign is tied to a body part.
Okay.
And Scorpio is tied to the reproductive system.
Really?
Yeah. Our rising sign is how you show up in the world and how people see you and the impression you leave on people. On one end, being a Scorpio rising can make you a little bit more mysterious up front. But also, I think it's just interesting that that's what you chose to trace a path.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Space.
I know all about Pisces sun and being a Pisces. I know that stuff, but the rising and the moon, I'm not as familiar with. So that's very interesting.
Yeah. And then the moon in Sagittarius, the symbol is an archer, pointing up. So it's this search for knowledge and always wanting to know more. Gemini and Sagittarius are opposite signs, so they're similar, but they also have some differences. So Gemini likes to know a little bit about everything and kind of explore a bunch of different perspectives. And Sagittarius is when you find something that you're really passionate about, you really want to go all in and become an expert and learn as much as you can. So do you resonate?
That makes
with
sense.
that?
I totally resonate with that. And ironically, it's healthcare is what I feel like I've become so passionate about and spent so much time focusing on. So it all kind of goes together.
It all ties in. We love it. So amazing. Let's jump straight into it. I actually have a lot of listeners and a lot of followers on my Instagram and TikTok that message me and asked me to talk more about PCOS. And you have PCOS, and that's kind of how you started your own hormone healing journey. And eventually that's what led into the creation of Allara. So can you just share your journey for anyone who doesn't know what it's been for you?
First off, I think I love to hear what you said about more people talking about it and asking about it. And I actually think it's been one of the most amazing things about social media is what it's done for women's healthcare because, I was diagnosed with PCOS about 12 years ago, honestly, off of a total fluke. I was having a lot of GI issues, a lot of stomach issues, which actually we know that there is some overlap between GI issues and hormonal health issues. And in the process of investigating all of that, I ended up having an ultrasound. And the ultrasound tech was the person who told me, did you know you had PCOS? And I was like, I don't even know what that is. What are you talking about? She said, well, I can see it on your ovaries. And
you had the cysts.
That I had the cysts. Yeah. And she's like, and do you have regular periods? I was like, well, I guess I get my period once a year. At the time, I don't know why I never thought to ask anybody about the fact that I got my period.
No one talked about it.
Yeah, no one talked about it. Again, I never heard the word PCOS. So I feel 12 years ago when I was diagnosed, number one, I had no idea what was going on. And number two, I really felt very isolated and very alone because my friends and I all first got our periods. They all were saying, it was all this exciting thing, you got your period. And then I just felt so different than everybody else. I didn't know why. And I didn't know that so many other people had issues like this. But now I feel so many more people have been talking about it, especially on social. And it's been so good for the movement because what a lot of people don't realize is how common PCOS is. We actually don't know the exact number because all things.
There's still a lot of undiagnosed women out
There's
there.
a lot of undiagnosed and all things in women's health, the research is horrible. But anywhere between 1 in 10 and 1 in 5 women have PCOS. So it's actually incredibly common. And overall, actually, about 1 in 3 women have some sort of a hormonal health condition, whether that is PCOS, endometriosis, hypothyroidism, or kind of even, maybe a combination of those. And so it's incredibly common. But again, for so many years, nobody talked about it. I felt I really didn't have any options. And I also felt I really didn't know where to go because a lot of times what it can feel in women's healthcare or how I felt was if I wasn't trying to get pregnant, there was no such thing as healthcare for me, right? I think a lot of times we think about women's healthcare as fertility and pregnancy care, when in reality, that's so far from the case. Women's healthcare should be about, the differences in a woman's body and what is going on biologically. That means that we need to help her live her best, healthiest life. And, I think unfortunately for so long, it's just been about like, well, let's just get you pregnant. And if you don't want to get pregnant, like there's nothing
Just
we can do
coast.
for you.
Yes.
Yeah. Just
Yeah.
wait until you want to get pregnant. And I found that really frustrating. And that honestly was why I started Allara. It frankly was just like a selfish founding journey where I really wanted something better, where I could go to a doctor who said, I'm going to treat you. I'm going to listen to you. I'm not going to make you wait until you want to get pregnant. And also I wanted a place where things could be treated more holistically. I kind of found like before you really got this option of like, you can either go the medical route or you can go the supplements, nutrition, lifestyle route. And, never the two shall meet. The two never overlap. And it just seemed so silly to me because it seemed like there was so much that we could gain from each of those avenues. You can gain a lot from traditional Western medicine. You can gain a lot from more of a holistic lifestyle approach to things. And I really wanted to blend those two things together. And so that's really the core of what we're doing at Allara is not only do we have doctors that you can engage with and get prescriptions from and get lab testing through, but we also have registered dietitians that you can work with who can work with you on lifestyle, on stress management, on sleep, on supplements. So it really is kind of best of both worlds that I found really hard to find elsewhere.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I love that. I mean, I'm a holistic health coach. I have a hormone specialization, but I'm always learning more. And I'm not a doctor or a dietitian, but I feel like just empowering women to understand their body is just so important. Something I feel very passionate about. I'm from Brazil, and every time I go visit my family there or I'm around my partner's family and I'm talking about cycle syncing or periods or things like that, I still notice that like in Brazil, people don't talk about it that much or as much as we do in the US. And just this awareness around like how our hormones actually change throughout the cycle, how that can impact our body and other options other than just birth control, and also just improving your overall health experience as a woman, and the fact that like we need more personalized care to our bodies. It's not just a one size fit all. And when I was looking in the Allara website, I was shook that it's 1 in 3 women.
Yeah.
It's actually wild.
It is crazy. It's crazy when you think about how little funding there's been for research on these conditions. PCOS and endometriosis get less than 0.01% of NIH funding for research. It's wild when you think about the fact that there's pretty much no pharmaceutical intervention for these conditions. So there's still not an FDA approved on-label medication for PCOS, right? When we treat you with medication, we're treating symptoms. Oftentimes it's off-label medications, meaning, for example, the medication is approved for, say, diabetes, but it also works for a PCOS patient. And there's also just not enough education, awareness, anything around it. So, I've been really excited to see how much things really felt like they've come along in the past few years when it comes to women's health, when it comes to women's health awareness, but we really have so far to go.
Yeah, it's just the beginning.
Yeah.
Honestly, it's interesting because going into this year, I really kind of just like set the intention of this year, I'm going to get testing done. Like, I'm going to figure out what's going on with my body, like with data. Like, I'm going to do my blood tests. I'm going to do hormone tests. I'm going to do gut tests. And then very soon after that, we got connected. And now I'm going through my own Allara journey. And I've met with my MD and the dietitian, and then now I have to go do the blood work. And then it's like on to the next step. But I was listening to you talk about your journey and like the Allara Instagram and other podcasts, and you were sharing that you were a late bloomer and you got your period a little bit late, and then it was kind of irregular for a while. And I actually struggled with the same thing. Like, I got a very late period. Like, going into high school, I was probably like 15 at the time, or 14, much later than all of my friends. And at the time, it was very irregular. And then that kind of happened. Then I had an eating disorder. My period went away, went on birth control. And then in the last like 3 years, I've been off of birth control and kind of like learning more about my body in the process. But my period is not regular. Like, I don't get a period every 28 days or every 30 days on the dot. It's always kind of 45 days or 30 days or 32. And that's like a very concerning thing to me. But I also know that that could be so many different things. And so I'm really curious to see how this journey is going to evolve and what I'll learn in the process. But something else that I think also people don't know about PCOS is that it's basically a conjunction of symptoms, right? So can you explain how that works and like how the diagnosis of PCOS specifically goes?
Yeah, sure. So PCOS at its core is really an imbalance of estrogen and testosterone. And so that's why, for a lot of PCOS patients, we'll see symptoms of high testosterone, like excess facial hair, like male pattern baldness or thinning hair, acne, things like that. And so the way that we actually diagnose PCOS is through what we call the Rotterdam criteria, and it's meeting 2 of the 3 Rotterdam criteria. So that's number 1, as I mentioned, having kind of the presence of excess androgens, either as shown in your blood work or as shown in those symptoms like acne, like facial hair. And the second is irregular menstrual cycles. And the third is the presence of cysts on the ovaries. And actually, PCOS, the naming is a bit of a misnomer because you actually can have PCOS without having cysts. You can have cysts without having PCOS. But it's by having 2 of the 3. And then the other thing that tends to be very common in PCOS patients is the other hormone that tends to be really affected is insulin.
I was about to ask that. I was going to
Yeah.
say, like, how does that tie in with blood sugar balance? Because I feel like that for a lot of people is
Yeah,
an issue,
so-
and like weight changes as a result of
Right.
that
So
too.
what we don't know exactly is what causes PCOS, but we know that oftentimes it's actually the precursor to those other hormone issues is an insulin issue. And about 75% of patients with PCOS have insulin resistance, which in turn means a lot of issues with blood sugar regulation, with weight. About 75% of PCOS patients also are overweight or obese. About half of them will develop type 2 diabetes by the time that they're 40. And then this is actually why it's so important to think about testing and treatment and awareness of these conditions is I think what tends to get assumed in healthcare and traditional healthcare is if you're thin, you're fine. And actually there's this feeling of like, if your weight is good, then you're good. And in reality, if you have PCOS, you could be at a thin weight but still have underlying insulin and other metabolic health issues. And so, for example, I am very, normal weight. And so up until I started working with my Allara doctor, no doctor had ever really looked at my cholesterol or my insulin levels because they were like, why would you? Why would we? You're thin. We don't need to worry about that. Got all my very extensive blood work tested with Allara. Turns out I'm insulin resistant, and also turns out I have extremely high cholesterol. And so now I'm working with my doctor on, I'm trying metformin to work on my insulin. We're doing fiber supplements to help with my cholesterol. I'm eating less red meat, but it's all these things that are actually so important. Again, so far beyond just can you get pregnant or not, but what's your long-term metabolic health like? How do we think about preventing diabetes in you? How do we think about preventing heart disease and stroke down the line? These are all the things that are so important that as women, we really need to be thinking about and really investigating more in our bodies to help prevent longer-term health issues.
Yeah, wow, I have so much to say on that. The first thing is you're completely right. I think there is this misconception that like weight determines your health. But I really believe that that's not the case. And like you could be extremely thin and then a lot of people in society is like, oh my God, she's so lean, she's so hot, she's so great, whatever. But then maybe there's a lot of other issues hormonally or metabolically or insulin wise that are off, or cholesterol even. And it's just a misconception that people have. Same thing with the other way around.
Right.
It's like sometimes people think like, or most people think gaining weight is always a bad thing, but sometimes you actually need to gain a little bit of weight to like restore your hormones.
Right.
So it's just so gray. Like there's not a black and white solution there. And so how did you decide to combine an MD, a dietitian? Like how did you create the process for Allara?
Again, I'll be honest, it sounds so simple, but I really just built what I wanted as a patient, which I think if you talk to a lot of successful founders, that really is something that does make for a successful startup is, did you feel a personal pain point and did other people feel that pain point too? And so for me, it really was, okay, what do I want? I want to be able to combine traditional Western medicine and medication and lab testing and all of that with more of the, the supplements and lifestyle. And maybe it's like the Pisces woo-woo in me a little bit, like we were talking about before, but I do think that combining those two makes for such a more effective outcome than just having one on its own. And, as much as I think social media has been so great for expanding these conversations, I think if I have one bone to pick with social media, it has become very polarizing and very like, okay, this way or the highway. And I saw a lot of messaging that was like, don't take birth control, don't do this medication, don't even talk to doctors, like just change your diet, just do this. And I was like, hold on, like, why do I have to pick? Why can't I do a combination of kind of everything? And so for me, it really was, as a patient, I wanted to talk to a doctor and I also wanted to talk to a nutritionist. And so I thought, if I really feel this need, and I know other women that I've talked to feel this need, nobody else is building it, I think I might as well just build it. So it really was just around my personal need and my personal desires.
Yeah, which is the best way to create a startup.
Right.
And once you spot that gap, and you're like, nothing like this exists.
Yes.
Then you create room for something really special.
And I think that actually was the craziest thing to me is I was looking for something and thinking like, something like this must exist. Like this problem is so big, the need is so obvious, like of course something already must exist. Again, as I was looking around for something for myself, I didn't find anything. And so that was more for me like, okay, if this doesn't exist, it needs to exist in the world. I think I can do it. Like I almost felt like I had this higher calling of like, I need to make it happen now.
Exactly. And I think the aspect of testing especially is so key because most times I go to the doctor or something and they order a blood test, it's just the basic.
Yep.
Just the basic things. Like, they don't really go in depth. And that's where I think the misdiagnoses happen, because they really just look at like the more high level things.
Yeah.
So just the fact that like that's the first step into working with anyone with Lara was like green flag.
Yeah, it's so important. And I think that also is a testament to why it's so important to have this kind of multi-factorial care model of doctors and registered dietitians. Because, for example, when we were coming up with the clinical protocols around lab testing, my lead dietitian and my medical director were working together. And initially, vitamin D and CRP, which is a test for inflammation levels, weren't on the list that the doctor created. And the dietitian said, hey, we need to add vitamin D and CRP would test for inflammation. And a lot of doctors initially, when they hear that, are like, oh, like,
we don't really
we don't really need that. Those are like just trends. And then the dietitian went into, okay, here's all the studies that talk about these things. Here's why it's really important in my care about why I need it. And as soon as she explained all that to the doctor was like, oh my God, I didn't know that because I've never worked with a dietitian before. I've never been exposed to this before, but now it makes sense. And there's so much value that comes out of having, again, this kind of multifactorial care aspect. And then kind of to what we were talking about before with personalized health. At the end of the day, there really is no one size fits all when it comes to hormonal health conditions. And so having really in-depth lab testing where we're looking at everything from your hormone levels to your thyroid levels to your metabolic health levels to your vitamin levels to your inflammation levels, like all of these are so important when we're thinking about how do we help you as an individual live your best life and live your healthiest life. And so, yeah, lab testing, again, whether it's through Allara, whether it's through your own doctor, pushing for really in-depth lab testing is actually, I think, one of the best things you can do for your health.
Yeah. I agree 100%. And I'm curious to double click on your own journey.
Mm-hmm.
So you were saying you basically had irregular periods for a long time. You go to this like lab tech, you do your ultrasound, you realize you have cysts. She's like, do you know you have PCOS? You don't really know what that means. You're like, what? And then what evolved after that?
Yeah, I wish I could say like I got this diagnosis and then my life changed and everything was great. And I think like most women with hormonal conditions, that's just really not the case. I ended up going to a bunch of different doctors, again, heard very often like, well, if you don't want to get pregnant, I don't really know how to help you or, you know, what to do for you. And so again, like a lot of women, I, turned to my own research. I was on social. I even was like looking on Reddit, which by the way, in like modern healthcare in America, the fact that we have to use Reddit to solve our health needs is insane.
It's crazy.
And I'd say actually for a long time, I ended up developing some really disordered eating patterns. For example, I read like, well, if you have PCOS, you have to be really careful about sugar. Don't eat any sugar. So it got to the point where—
And gluten and dairy.
Yes, and gluten and dairy. So I tried no gluten. I tried no dairy. At some points, I like wouldn't even eat bananas because I thought that they had too many carbs and sugar. And it just kind of like really got off track. And what I've actually found, again, working with our dietitians and learning more around the science behind a lot of these things and studies behind a lot of these things is, not everybody needs to be gluten and dairy free. Actually, if you don't have an intolerance to gluten and dairy, you probably don't need to be gluten and dairy free. And in fact, actually having full fat dairy because of the hormones that cows
like
have.
Full fat, like not
full
0%,
fat. Yes,
not
it's actually
2%.
better for you. It actually is less sugar and has like more satiating fat and protein, and because of the hormones in it can actually help sometimes with that kind of hormone imbalance that we have. So if you're, for example, trying to conceive, sometimes full fat dairy can be actually like a helpful thing to add in. By full fat, I mean like whole milk, which in America is like 4%. It's not like cream or anything. But so even learning things like that was just so eye-opening to me about like, okay, I just took at face value all these things, but when you actually get into the science and what works for your own body, you don't need to be so restrictive and so tough. And I think that's been one of the biggest blessings to me in this whole journey is I think for a long time I viewed having PCOS and having this hormonal health condition as, okay, it's this burden and it's this thing that now I have to do all these things and I have to cut all these things out and I can't do this and I can't do that. And in reality, I've learned over the past, I'd say 4 or 5 years of how much I actually can do and how much I can add in. And, it's just about making small tweaks as opposed to changing your whole life. And that's been really, I'd say really helpful to me over my journey in these past 5 years.
Yeah. That's so amazing. I feel like it's so important to talk about this, like the misinformation almost, or just like the blanket statements, because I have many coaching clients and also many friends that have been diagnosed with PCOS that feel super confused on where to start and then start doing some research and they fall into this loop of like, I need to cut out all dairy. I need to cut out all gluten. And then it kind of creates this orthorexic behavior where you're like really, really scared of certain ingredients and maybe you don't even have to be. So I think that's so important to kind of demystify. And again, I think it all goes back to the bioindividuality aspect and just the fact that you really have to figure out what works for your body. And again, PCOS itself is not the same for every person. Like some people might be more likely to struggle with insulin resistance. Other people, it's more the testosterone balancing. Other people, it's the cysts. For some people, going on birth control is actually the better solution. For other people, maybe not. And I think it's just kind of diving into that a little bit more. And what do you think have been like the top 3 to 5 lifestyle shifts that have helped you the most?
First of all, I'm so glad you said that about birth control, because it's like crazy to me how demonized birth control has become, when actually like I love birth control for myself personally. I think it's so individual, but there's just such a perfect example of like you should take things personally. I think number one for me has been just figuring out movement that I like and that works with my body. I found that for me, actually like doing a ton of walking and then doing either strength training or Pilates is kind of what makes me the happiest. That being said, something else that I've gotten into and really started to love is running, which
we have to talk about.
Which we have to talk about. I just ran the New York Marathon last year, which was like one of the best experiences of my life. And that actually was really helpful to me, just on a like, forget like how I look, what my endurance was, any of that. Like from a mental health perspective, it was so empowering to me to be like, okay, I can do this really hard thing that I never in a million years thought I could do, and I can accomplish it. And like all of a sudden I stopped caring so much about eating for my weight. I was eating for performance and eating to fuel my runs. And it was just so empowering for me. So I've been taking a little bit of a break from running, but I want to do a half soon and get that started back up. The second lifestyle thing I've been trying to work on is just working on my stress a little bit. I think especially as, a founder, I have a lot of stress in my life. I've been trying to figure out what are ways that I can work on improving my stress levels. How can I maybe like go with the flow a little bit more, be more in the moment? I think that's been really helpful for me. And then the third thing has been thinking about, we talk about this a lot, like your balanced PCOS plate with our dietitian. So thinking about how do you have really balanced meals? So how do you have meals that have fat, carbs, and protein? So for example, before I was scared to eat a banana. Now I'll put a banana in my smoothie, which also has like flax seeds for fiber and it has protein powder in it for protein. Or I'll put peanut butter in an apple so that it helps to reduce blood sugar spikes. Because if you have an apple, I'm sure you could talk about this way better than me. But like, for example, if you have an apple alone, it might spike your blood sugar more than if you have it with peanut butter. So just thinking about like, again, not giving up certain foods, but how do I add to my meals and add to my snacks to make them more balanced?
For sure. And I think, again, not a one size fits all approach. I always talk about this though as something that applies to most people. Like balancing your plate can help, I think, every single person out there, especially with energy levels, just like feeling better throughout your day, feeling more energized, more nourished. It obviously helps you get more nutrients in the process. But why I'm saying I don't think it's a one size fits all approach either is like, for example, before I go on a run, I need a lot of quick carbs. So like I'll have a banana on its own.
Yeah.
But if I'm having a banana like at other times of day, I would pair it with like a healthy fat or fiber or something like that. So I think it's also like, again, not black and white. But I agree with everything you said. I think that is so important. And I have said that to all of my friends that have been diagnosed with PCOS. It's like, balance your blood sugar, try to incorporate strength training, find movement that feels good in your body, and then stress management. So huge. And I think about stress management too, something I've really been leaning into in this phase of my life that has been a little bit more stressful because I'm training for half, planning my wedding, and just like balancing coaching and podcasting and YouTube and all the things. Just self-employment is like in many ways also a very stressful vibe. It's obviously different than like having a full-fledged company and being like a full entrepreneur. It's still entrepreneurial on its own. And I feel like for me, it's really hard to turn off from work and just be like, okay, I'm stopping. I'm not touching work right now. And even yesterday, I noticed this. Like I kind of stopped working around dinner time, had dinner, ran a bath. I was like in the bath. I was reading my Court of Thorns and Roses book. We were just talking about this before we started recording, how we're both obsessed
with Sarah J. Maas. Obsessed.
Literally. And I was like reading, and then I was like, damn, I was really able to disconnect from work today. And then the moment that I had that awareness, I was like, okay, let me go like check TikTok and like maybe look at this video that I should be editing. And I had to like consciously stop myself and be like, no. Yeah. You're putting this away. You're getting in bed and you'll look at this tomorrow.
Yes. It's so true. Finding that balance between life and work and, really learning to shut off is so hard. And I think that's true like for anybody who has a job that they're really passionate about. But yeah, that's something I've been working on too, is like, how do I find some moments where I'm just really shutting off and relaxing?
Yeah. Have you figured out any things that are helping you with
So I do think to what we were talking about before the podcast, like we were both saying how we both love fantasy books.
Yes.
I've really been getting back into reading. And I think reading has been huge for me because, for example, if I'm watching TV, oftentimes I'm also checking my email or I'm also checking Slack. And I'll give my boyfriend a shout out here. He's really good at being like, Rachel, put down your phone, get off your email. We're watching a show. But I find it's really easy to do other things while I'm doing that. Whereas reading, you're 100% focus. So I've actually been really getting back into reading, and I found that to be really helpful for just like you're only focusing on one thing. You're getting really absorbed into this world, which is I think why I love fantasy.
I think like reading
Yeah.
fiction especially,
Yeah.
and reading something that's completely like not supernatural, but like not
Right.
necessarily like real life. It's a way to completely disconnect from
Correct. Yes.
your current situation.
Yeah. So yeah, I love reading, or sometimes I'll do like an audiobook and I'll go for a walk. But yeah, reading has been like such a game changer for me in terms of de-stressing and unplugging.
Yes. Love that. And now let's talk about running, because I think that is something that in the hormone space also can be demonized. It's like, oh, okay, I want to run, but I've heard it's really bad for my hormones. It's really bad for my cortisol. And something from the very beginning that I talked about in my own journey with running, which started last year when I decided to train for my first half marathon, I was like, okay, you know what? I just have to be mindful of other areas of my life that could be spiking my cortisol, like work stress or how much coffee I'm drinking or if I'm sleeping enough. So that's kind of like how I approached running. But I'm curious to hear from your end, like how did you balance it with your hormone health?
So I think actually where I would start is why are you running? I think that's actually so important because if you are running to burn calories and lose weight,
like as a punishment,
number one, that is, I think, what's actually going to strike your cortisol is if like you view running as a punishment or torture and it's stressful to you and you're doing it anyway to burn calories. Number one, I think that will strike your cortisol. And number two, I have really, really bad news for everybody, which is I trained for a marathon. I've never burned so many calories in my life, and I gained 2 pounds because on the note of like all the cortisol spiking stuff, I actually don't think that like running a marathon is the best thing you can do for weight loss or looking your best. But mentally, it was just so powerful to me. And for me, actually, I found running to be really de-stressing because I would go out for a run. I'd be outside. The weather would be beautiful. I'd just be like jamming out to music or listening to an audiobook. And for me, I really got to be like, okay, I'm going to turn off. I'm going to de-stress. And so my why for running was not to burn calories. It was not to lose weight. It was, I wanted to accomplish something that was a really big goal that I set for myself. And I wanted to just frankly like have a reason to be outside and jam out to music. And
same. I feel like there's so many benefits to running outside, especially because similarly to what you were talking about with like watching TV versus reading, it's like if you're walking on the treadmill or even walking outside, you could technically scroll or check messages or whatever.
Which I do.
Which is like much easier to do when you're walking, and like I do it too. But when you're running, it's like you are not able to do that. Yeah. Like you are focused, you're present, and I love just the energy of being outside, getting fresh air, seeing the trees, like connecting with nature, connecting with music, with sound, with your body.
Yeah.
And also when you do a race specifically, I think the act of being like, I'm going to do this hard thing that I didn't think I would ever be able to do. And here I am like committing and showing up and doing the thing. And the mental toughness that you develop is just unmatched.
Totally. And it's such a good lesson, honestly, for life. Again, like whatever, you can tell we're both like such runners now.
We're running girlies.
Yeah. I ran one half marathon before. I never in a million years thought I could run a marathon, let alone run like 15 miles or 16 miles or 20 miles. And yet each week you're increasing your mileage, and each week you do a run that you never thought you could do before. And you really get to see the progression that you can make, again, not only physically, but mentally, and that mental toughness. It really teaches you like you can set your mind to something and you can achieve it, even if it seems
completely
scary and outside your or it seems impossible. And so I think it's like such a good lesson for life too. But I'd say in terms of like thinking about running and hormone health, if you're running to lose weight or to burn calories, don't do it. Go for a walk. Frankly, I think that's going to be more productive for that goal anyways.
Yeah.
But if you truly are doing it because you want to and you feel driven to complete a race or accomplish something and you want to be outside and run, don't not do it because you're worried about cortisol spikes. Like that's not a reason.
And then just like adjust everything else.
Right.
Like, adjust your coffee intake, sleep a little more.
And I also would tell myself when I was on my run, like, and this was part of my strategy of getting through these really long runs, was I'm really enjoying this right now. I'm really enjoying the ability to like, yes, I was like, I'm really enjoying the ability to like be outside and move my body. And I think your mind actually has such an impact on your body. And so even something as simple as like telling yourself, I'm having fun, I'm not stressed, I'm enjoying this is stress relieving, I think actually can really help with all those downstream effects.
I'm like all about feeding your subconscious mind the right thoughts and the right beliefs, and then just like living and taking action to enforce those beliefs. So I do that pretty much in every single run, especially in the beginning when I was really starting to train. It's just like, I'm a runner, I love my body, I trust my body, I will complete this run successfully, and just like saying them over and over, it becomes your beliefs.
Yeah.
So love that. And speaking of running in the sense of like strengthening your mental toughness, right? That's not just the only way that you can strengthen your mental toughness. And I've recently been getting really into stoicism, which is like very new to me. And essentially, a huge philosophy behind stoicism is to purposely do difficult things to build up discipline, to build up self-trust, to build up confidence. So I think that can also apply into so many other areas of life. It's like if you tell yourself you want to do something, do it. Or if you wake up and you're dreading this one task because it feels really hard, it's like go and do that task first and really prove to yourself that you can do hard things. Same thing can be said about lifting or just challenging yourself in a different way. So I think that's also really powerful, and it's kind of like the theme of what we're touching on with running.
Another thing that's really huge is kind of letting go of the fear of failure, because I think that's, if you think about why we don't do a lot of these things, it's not just that it's hard, it's that we feel like it's going to be too hard for us to do and we don't want to fail. And so we just don't even start. I don't know about you, but actually some of the most empowering, best things that have ever happened to me in terms of long-term growth have been my failures and have been the things that didn't work out the way I wanted to. So I think that is such a huge thing too, like allowing yourself to fail and allowing yourself to be like, okay, I failed, but it actually wasn't the end of the world. I actually learned a lot from this and I'm going to try again and do something, because failure is actually kind of a gift sometimes.
Yeah, I agree. But I think it's also about seeing yourself fail, being in that experience, and then showing up again.
Yeah,
like,
totally.
That's how it truly strengthens you, I think.
Yeah.
Instead of letting that be a reason for you to give up on yourself.
Right.
Or to just like be in that fixed mindset. It's developing the ability to see it as a lesson, to take something away from it, to show up again, which is very hard.
Yes, it is very hard.
It takes a lot of grit.
Yeah. Yeah. So. And again, not to like, just the last thing I'm running, but I think that is the value of signing up for a race is like I remember
about running again.
I remember like my 12-mile run was horrific. And then, you have to show up the next week if you want to do the race. Like you just have to. And so finding things like that force you to keep showing up, I think are really powerful.
Yeah, exactly. Like I did my first half last year and then I was like, oh, I definitely want to do another one in 2024. And then the opportunity presented itself for me to do the New York City half, which is in March. And when I decided to sign up, I had 7 weeks. I was like,
wow.
Oh my gosh, when I trained for my first half, I had 4 months. Now I have like 2.5. Like, can I do it? And I just like found a way to make it happen. I was like, okay, I just have to add in a long run. And it motivates you because you have that end goal. And as you said, it's not just about the race. It's about every single week leading up to it and seeing the growth that happens along the way.
Totally.
So what do you think has been like one failure that has taught you a lot, if you feel comfortable sharing?
Oh, yeah. Okay, this is actually I'd say probably my biggest life failure is when I was 27, I called off my wedding, which I think is something people don't talk about a lot. Like we talk about divorce. I don't think people talk about failed engagements all that much. At the time, it was like the most embarrassing, horrific, horrible thing that had ever happened. Like I remember truly knowing it wasn't the right person, but not wanting to call it off just because I didn't want to be embarrassed about having to tell everybody that I called off my wedding. And actually, it was the best thing that ever happened to me because, again, kind of what we're talking about failure, what I thought was going to be this horrible thing, I thought everyone was going to judge me. I thought I was going to be so embarrassed. Everybody actually was so supportive. Like everyone in my life was like, that's so courageous of you. That's incredible. Like good for you. And it, again, showed me that, number one, you might not only be underestimating yourself and what you can do and what you can get through, but you might be underestimating the people around you and how much they'll show up for you and support you. And so I truly feel like I am a 100 times better version of myself today than I was before that relationship, or than I would have been had I just kind of gone through with it and stayed in that. And so, yeah, that was probably my biggest
Thank you for
failure.
Sharing.
Yeah.
But I don't even see that as a failure. I just see that as like a situation that was very vulnerable that you chose to face, right? Because you could have just coasted and just been like, okay, I'm going to stay in my comfort zone. I'm not going to face this like inner voice that's trying to shout at me, but you decided to listen.
Yes.
And you listen to your intuition and now you feel like you're in a better situation.
Yeah.
In a better position in your romantic relationships with yourself. And I think a concept I talk a lot about with all of my clients is cognitive dissonance, which is basically the discomfort that you feel when you're not acting in alignment with your values or with what you want to achieve or build or who you want to be. So I'm sure that when you were in that situation, like starting to plan a wedding and like not feeling right about it, like not feeling like it was the right person, it felt really uncomfortable.
Yes.
And in choosing to face that cognitive dissonance and choose a different path and make an uncomfortable choice, you've now found a much more comfortable place mentally and energetically.
100%. And I also agree, by the way, like I don't necessarily view it as a failure. I think it's one of those things that society might call a failure. At the time, I thought was a failure. But again, I feel like I have learned so much, and not only learned so much like about what I want in terms of a romantic relationship, but what I want in my life and how I want to live my life authentically and how I don't want to be that person again who feels like I'm not being my authentic self.
Yeah, exactly. And kind of touching on this concept and theme of like growing, what do you feel like you have learned about yourself, and how has your relationship with yourself gotten strengthened through healing your hormones and through finding the lifestyle shifts that help you live a better life
Yeah.
with PCOS?
I think one of the biggest benefits of all of the trial and error I've done over, the past 12 years of trying to figure out my PCOS has been figuring out what works for my body and getting more in tune with my body. I think that actually is a gift of having a hormonal condition. If you don't have one of these conditions and you're just kind of going about your day to day, you're probably not thinking that much about, okay, how's my body feeling? Like, does something feel off? Is something feel imbalanced? Like, could I be doing something to feel better? And because I've had all these hormonal health issues, I've had to spend a lot more time thinking about, like, how do I feel better? What are the movement patterns that make me feel better? What's the diet that makes me feel better? What's like the supplements that make me feel better? And it's really made me be, I'd say, much more in tune with my body. And that I think has really been an opportunity to figure out, how do I thrive as an individual that maybe had I not gone through all these challenges, I would just be coasting and, kind of doing whatever's easiest as opposed to what feels the best for me.
Exactly. And if anyone out there is listening and they recently got diagnosed with PCOS or any other hormone health condition, what advice would you give?
Yeah. So I'd say my biggest advice is to find providers who take you seriously and who you feel like are supporting you in your journey. I hear from so many patients or so many friends, like, I went to this doctor and they just kind of dismissed me, or they didn't run the tests I want to run. And what we forget is that in a lot of ways, healthcare is really a consumer business. And so if you feel like you aren't being treated well as a consumer, just like, if you went to a restaurant and you didn't like the service, you wouldn't go back, don't go back to that doctor. Like, go find a different one who will treat you the way you want to be treated, and really just be willing to advocate for yourself. And again, find somebody who will run those tests for you, who will listen to you, who will take you seriously. I think that's something we do a really good job of at Allara, but whether it's Allara or, your gynecologist in person or whoever it is, find medical providers who really help support you through the journey. I'd say that's my number one advice.
Yeah, and it's just like, don't settle.
Right. Yes.
Right? Like, don't settle for a doctor that doesn't hear you. Don't think that these doctors don't exist, because they do. And it's just like, might take a little while to find, but it's possible to find the support that you deserve. So I love that. And what's one hormone health tip you would say anyone, whether they have a hormone condition or not, any woman specifically, should think about more?
I truly think that there's nothing that walking can't solve. Like, if you're having a bad day, you're stressed, you're upset, you're tired, like, I just think walking is like really a cure-all, especially walking outside. So I'd say going for a walk every day is something that everyone could benefit from.
Do you do it every day? Or
I do. I walk.
Day?
I try to walk every morning. So whether that's like outside or going to the office or going on the treadmill, even for like, sometimes I go on the treadmill for 10 minutes in the morning before I work, but I do walk every morning.
That's amazing. That's something I want to get into more, but I don't do it outside enough, I think. Like, I was doing it every single day during lockdown.
Yeah.
And then with life, like, I still move my body like almost every single day, but going on an intentional walk, like, okay, I'm going to go outside for like 10 minutes or 20 minutes.
And I think that's the thing. I think people are like, oh, I have to go for a walk for an hour. It doesn't count. Go for 10 minutes. Like, just go for 10 minutes. You'll be so much happier.
Yeah, exactly. And like, that's so doable. It's like so easy and tangible.
Yeah.
So love that. And let's do some rapid fire questions to finish off the episode. So the first question I love asking everyone is, what makes you feel like your higher self?
Honestly, getting like a really good workout or a really good run in. I just feel like that moment after you just finished and you just feel on top of the world, that's the best feeling.
The endorphins.
Yeah.
It's real.
Yeah.
Okay, I love that. And what are your favorite books, and what books would you recommend to anyone listening?
I'm laughing because we went on such a tangent about this before the podcast, but I'm obsessed with all of the Sarah J. Maas books. So A Court of Thorn and Roses, the Throne of Glass series. I'm now reading her latest book in the Crescent City series. I've just gotten like on a very big fantasy kick. So I'd say anything Sarah J. Maas I'd recommend.
I totally agree with that statement. And it's so funny because I was not a fantasy person, and now I completely am. And once you enter the world of A Court of Thorns and Roses, it's like you start to notice like all the people around you that have read it, and then you just like connect with people in such a cool way.
Oh yeah, it was my gateway drug into fantasy. Now I'm like obsessed with fantasy.
I just feel like when I would hear fantasy, it'd be like, oh, that's so geeky. Like, it's weird.
Same.
But it's totally not. It's like actually really awesome and really cool.
One, it's not, and two, like, I'm okay with being geeky.
Yeah, it's good to be geeky.
Yeah.
I don't mind it now.
Yeah.
Okay, and then what does inner growth mean to you?
Inner growth is being willing to look at yourself and accept not only things you like about yourself, but accepting the things that you don't like about yourself and being willing to see them and accept them.
Self-acceptance.
Yeah.
I totally think that's so important because if you don't accept who you are and accept your imperfections, especially, it's really hard to truly love yourself and to truly make the most loving choices because you're kind of like ignoring different aspects of yourself. And tying in with that, do you have a quote or a mantra that you love or that you live by or come back to frequently?
Yeah, I read this quote when I was going through this breakup like 5 years ago, and it really stuck with me. And it's like this excerpt of a poem. I forget the exact language, but it's like you're looking at a cliff and you think, if I jump, what if I fall? Oh, but actually, what if you fly? And that just really stuck with me. So I always think about like, okay, but what if you fly?
Yes.
That's mine.
Yes, I've heard that one before. It's so good. And that makes me think of The Court of Thorns and Roses, book 3. And then the last question is, if someone didn't hear anything from this episode except this part, what would you want to leave them with?
If you are a woman and you feel like there is something off in your body or you don't feel the way that you want to feel, you should be empowered to take action on that. And so if you feel like you aren't getting the answers you need from whoever you are currently seeing in the health system, do some research and ask questions, but find somebody who will help you figure it out. Because if you feel like there's something off with your body, there probably is, and you deserve to feel your best. So I would say don't be afraid to ask questions and to really investigate if you feel like something's off.
Our body speaks to us.
Yes.
And we just have to listen. So I love that so much. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. I loved having you on. And if anyone is listening and they want to learn more about Allara or become a patient with Allara, how can they get started?
Yeah. So you can find us on socials on both TikTok and Instagram at Allara Health, ALLARA, or you can find us on our website, allarahealth.com. You can find me at Rachel H. Blank.
Amazing. And then through the website, they can do like an initial consult, or what's the first step?
Yeah. So if you go to our website, you can fill out your information. We'll essentially tell you what you're eligible for. So there are certain states, for example, where we take your insurance. We're working on expanding our insurance coverage as quickly as possible. And you can either sign up directly or you can actually sign up for a free phone consult where we can walk you through the program, tell you what makes the most sense for you, and help you figure out, again, what's kind of the most affordable way to pay for it.
Amazing. I hope everyone listening who's needing that extra hormone health support checks out Allara because I'm loving it so far, and I'm excited to just see where my own journey takes me. And again, thank you, Rachel, for coming today. This was lovely.
Thank you so much. This is awesome.
Yay. Thank you to everyone listening. I will see you next week with another episode. Don't forget to water yourself, and you can follow us at innergrove.co on Instagram or find us on YouTube at Inner Grove Podcast. I'll see you guys next week, and bye for now.